back to my channel. This is chesshub64 and welcome to the fourth part of the Closed Sicilian series. And in this part I'll be showing you after f4 pawn to e6. So in my previous episode I've already shown you after f4 e5 variation. If you haven't checked it out, be sure to check it out, link will be in the description. So let's just see the e6 variation. So after e4, c5, knight to c3, d6, g3, this is the Closed Sicilian, g6, bishop to g2, bishop to g7, d3, knight to c6, f4 and e6. So now we play knight to f3, knight g to e7. So the idea of e6 and knight g to e7 is that these pawns are really protecting this f5 square and preventing any expansion of white by playing g4 and f5. So this right here, this e7 knight, e6 pawn and g6 pawn are preventing the f5 expansion. So now we play short castle, short castle, bishop to e3, knight to d4, rook to b1. The idea of rook to b1 is to protect this b2 pawn, because after the knight moves, this bishop would take it. So that is the reason why I play rook to b1. Now he has two options. Black can play d5, and the idea of d5 is to take on f3, give a check, and after bishop takes, play d4, pinning these two pieces. So after d5 we play knight to e5, f6 and knight to g4, and this is actually good for white. So the main line is knight e to c6. So in this we are discussing the game between Karpov and Quinterius, and this was played in 1980. So here Quinterius played knight e to c6, Karpov played knight to e2, knight takes on f3, bishop takes on f3, b6, c3, protecting this d4 square, bishop to b7, queen to d2. Now he can play two moves. He can play knight e7 or he can play pawn to d5. Let us see what happens if he plays knight to e7. After knight to e7, his main idea is that when white plays d4, he can take on d4, and after we take on d4, play f5. And this is actually quite good for black. So this is the reason after knight to e7 we do not play d4, but instead play g4. And this is actually good for white. So coming back, after queen to d2, Quinterius here played pawn to d5, e5 was played, and in this case d4 is not possible because we can take this, and after knight takes on d4, knight takes on d4, bishop takes on b7, white is actually a pawn up. So this is the reason after e5 he cannot play d4, and Quinterius here played a5, Karpov played d4, and now this pawn chain is very good for white. Queen to e7 was played, bishop to f2, and now bishop to a6, and this bishop here pins this knight and the rook. So rook f to e1 was played by Karpov, but the problem with this move is that after rook f to e1, black can play c takes on d4, and now if we take on d4 with a pawn, he can play knight to b4, and then these squares can be easily be very dangerous for white, and after the knight lands on d3, this is going to be very problematic. So this is the reason after c takes on d4, white cannot play c takes on d4 and would perhaps have to play knight takes on d4. So this is the problem with rook f to e1. The better move and what we should play in this position is pawn to a3. And this has got the idea that after c takes on d4, we can now play c takes on d4, because this pawn here is protecting this b4 square and preventing this knight on c6 to jump to b4. But let us just see what happens if he plays rook f to e1, and let's just continue the game of Karpov and Quinterius. So after rook f to e1, Quinterius didn't play c takes on d4, but instead played pawn to h5, which is not a very good option. But after h5, white played h3, rook a to c8, king to g2, f5, queen to e3, rook to f7. By the way, d takes on c5 here doesn't work, because after b takes on c5, queen takes on c5, queen takes on c5, bishop takes on c5, black can just play knight takes on e5 and win the pawn back. Hence, Karpov here played pawn to a3, and after a4 he played g4, C takes on d4, C takes on d4, and now this pawn on a3 is preventing this knight to come to b4. H takes on g4, H takes on g4, knight to a5, and these squares can be, the knight can land on this b3 or c4 square and can be quite dangerous. G takes on f5. If G takes on f5, then bishop to h5, rook f2, rook f to f8, and bishop to g6, and queen to h3 followed by queen to h7 checkmate can be very problematic to handle. So this is the reason after G takes on f5, black was forced to take with his rook. Rook takes on f5, bishop to g4 attacking the rook, rook f to f8, rook to h1, king f7, rook h7, rook h8, rook b to h1. If he had taken this rook, then after rook takes on h7, rook h8, queen h3, rook takes on h7, and queen takes on h7, white is better because bishop to h4, things like bishop to h4 followed by bishop to f6, this is pinned, this bishop is pinned, and many more things can happen. So after this position, white is better. This is the reason after rook b to h1, Quintarius played knight to c4 attacking this queen. Queen went to g3, knight takes on b2, pawn to f5 was played. If e takes on f5, then we can just take bishop takes on f5 because he cannot take this because rook takes on g7 followed by taking the queen. So that is the reason why Quintarius played rook takes on h7, f takes on g6 check. If king takes on g6, then knight to f4 check followed by rook takes on h7 will win the game. So that is the reason why he played king to g8. But now g takes on h7 check, king to h8, and after knight to f4, Quintarius resigned because white is just winning, and ideas like knight to g6 for checkmate are very difficult to prevent. So guys, this was the tutorial on the fourth part of the Closed Sicilian series, the e6 variation. And all, just remember that this rook f to e1 thing which Karpov played, a3 is better in this position because after c takes on d4 you can take with the pawn and prevent this knight from jumping to b4 square. Alright guys, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and subscribe to my channel, turn on the notifications, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.